The officer had his hand resting on his gun before the man had even stepped out of the car. In the carpool lane of one of Virginia's most prestigious private schools, right in front of hundreds of parents, teachers, and children, Officer Bryce Harlan decided that this particular man, this well-dressed, calm, patient man who had done absolutely nothing wrong, simply did not belong there. What happened in the moments that followed was captured on 17 different phones, broadcast on every major network within hours, and would ultimately cost one police department $35.7 million. But the real twist was that no one knew who Marcus Ellington actually was. One ordinary afternoon unfolded in its usual rhythm at Summit Academy in Fairfax County, Virginia, with the graceful choreography of wealth and routine. Summit was the kind of school that parents fought for, not with raised voices, but with generous donations, board appointments, and carefully worded legal concerns. The campus stretched across manicured grounds off a quiet tree-lined road where tuition ran $38,000 a year, and the parking lot resembled a luxury dealership that had simply relocated to the suburbs of Washington, D.C. The carpool lane had become a slow-moving river of Mercedes SUVs, Range Rovers, and one understated black Chevy Suburban with government plates. Clean, purposeful, the kind of vehicle that announced importance without needing to shout. Marcus Ellington had been trying to make this pickup for weeks. His calendar was the kind of document national security analysts referenced, filled with slots marked classified, briefing, joint chiefs, and Senate oversight. His assistant, a meticulous woman named Nora Caldwell who had served 3 FBI directors in her career, had color-coded his schedule in 7 categories: red for critical, blue for congressional, green for personal. The pickup at Summit Academy had been marked green, personal, for 11 consecutive weeks. He had missed 10 of them. His daughter, Brielle, was 9 years old and in 4th grade. She loved horses, macaroni art, and the animated film Moana, which she had seen 23 times by her own careful count. She had her father's eyes, dark, steady, observant, and her mother's laugh, the kind that arrived suddenly and filled entire rooms. Brielle had been asking, in that quiet, persistent way only children can, when Daddy would finally be the one to pick her up again. Today was the day. Marcus had told Nora to hold everything after 2 o'clock. He had told his security detail he was taking the Suburban alone, a request they hated, one that violated every protocol, but one they could not refuse because he was, after all, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He outranked the protocol. He pulled into the Summit carpool lane 12th in line and sat there with the quiet satisfaction of a man who, for once, was exactly where he wanted to be. He had loosened his tie. The radio played low. Ordinary Love. He wore a charcoal suit tailored years earlier that still fit perfectly because, despite everything, Marcus Ellington carried discipline in his bones. He was 53 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered, and completely, utterly, dangerously calm. That calmness would matter later. People would describe it in 100 different ways across 100 different accounts. So quiet, so still, hands on the wheel. The calmness was not performance. It was not compliance. It was simply who Marcus Ellington was, a man who had spent 31 years in federal law enforcement and had learned, somewhere around year 4, that the most dangerous thing a black man in America could be during a confrontation with police was anything other than still. He remained still, and it still did not matter. Officer Bryce Harlan had been assigned to Summit Academy's carpool lane for 3 weeks. It was not a glamorous posting. The Fairfax County Police Department had agreed to provide afternoon traffic coordination after a minor fender bender involving 2 parents who were both lawyers and who had both threatened lawsuits. The principal, Evelyn Thorpe, had called the precinct. The precinct had sent Harlan. Harlan was 27 years old and had been on the force for just over a year. He was not a bad person in the way the worst people are bad. He did not wake up with malice or plan his days around cruelty, but he carried something perhaps more dangerous than malice: unexamined certainty. He was certain about how things looked, certain about who belonged where, certain, in a way he had never been asked a question, about which faces fit in carpool lanes like this one and which ones did not. He saw Marcus's Suburban. He noted the government plates, but did not think deeply about them. Lots of government workers lived in Fairfax, Pentagon contractors, low-level staffers. The plates meant nothing specific to him. He saw Marcus, and something shifted in his posture. Something small, something he would later insist was professional instinct, and that body language experts hired by the plaintiff's attorneys would spend hours dissecting in a Virginia courtroom. His hand moved toward his belt. Not all the way, just close, the way a reflex moves before the conscious mind catches up. He walked toward the Suburban. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle." Marcus heard the words and processed them with the particular weariness of a man who had lived inside his own skin for 53 years. He looked in his side mirror, saw the uniform, did a quick, experienced assessment. Posture tense, hand near the belt. The specific flavor of nervous authority he had learned over 3 decades to treat with exquisite care. He powered down his window instead, slow and deliberate. "Good afternoon, officer," he said. His voice was measured, not friendly, not hostile, professional. "Is there a problem?" "Sir, I asked you to step out of the vehicle." Harlan had moved to the driver's side window now. His partner, Officer Kai Lennox, 24 years old and 6 months on the job, had materialized on the passenger side. Neither of them knew exactly why. This was simply how it sometimes went. One moved and the other followed, the unspoken choreography of authority. "I'm in the carpool lane," Marcus said. "I'm picking up my daughter." Whose daughter? The question landed in the afternoon air with a specific weight. Whose daughter? Not which student, not what is her name. Whose? As if ownership were the most natural clarifying question in the world. Marcus looked at Harlan for a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4. In those seconds, 17 parents watched from their own vehicles. A teacher's aide named Simone Prescott, standing at the carpool gate with a clipboard, had stopped marking names. 2 fourth graders who had just emerged from the building stood very still in the way children do when adult situations suddenly feel large. "My daughter," Marcus said. "Brielle Ellington, 4th grade. Do you have ID?" "Officer, do you ask every parent in this line for ID?" It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question posed with the precision of a man who had spent 31 years separating relevant from irrelevant. But Harlan heard, or constructed, something else in it, and his hand moved all the way to his belt now. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle now." "On what grounds?" "Sir, I'm asking you a specific question." Marcus's voice had not risen, not even half a note. "On what legal grounds are you asking me to exit my vehicle? I am in a lawful carpool lane. I have committed no traffic violation. I have not been aggressive. I have identified myself by name and stated my purpose, so I am asking you on what grounds." This was the moment trial attorneys would later agree a more experienced officer would have paused, taken a breath, stepped back, called a supervisor, and recognized the question for what it was. Not obstruction, but a legitimate inquiry from someone who clearly knew his rights. Harlan was not a more experienced officer. "Out of the vehicle. Final warning." Marcus Ellington opened the door. He stepped out slowly, hands visible, suit jacket falling perfectly around his shoulders, tie loosened but still present. And he stood beside his Suburban in the afternoon sun while Lennox came around, and 2 more officers, who had apparently been nearby, pulled in behind the Suburban in response to a radio call no one outside could hear. 4 officers, 1 black man in a tailored suit standing next to a government-plated Suburban in a school carpool lane. The handcuffs went on. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior and failure to comply," Harlan said. Marcus said nothing. He kept his hands behind his back. He was watching the school entrance. Somewhere inside, Brielle was waiting. He was thinking about that. Just that. And he kept his face completely neutral because he understood, with a clarity that reached all the way to his marrow, that his composure right now was not just personal, it was survival. What no one, not Harlan, not Lennox, not the two backup officers, had yet done was run the plates. Simone Prescott had. She had taken out her phone, photographed the rear plate, and within seconds pulled up the DMV registration because her brother-in-law worked at the Virginia DMV and had once shown her how to use the public records portal. The registration came back: United States Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Vehicle assigned to the office of the director. Simone stood very still for a moment. Then she went inside and got Principal Evelyn Thorpe. Evelyn Thorpe had been principal of Summit Academy for 11 years. She was 61, white-haired, small in stature, and possessed of a kind of institutional authority that had calcified over decades into something close to impenetrable. She had handled board members, donors, divorcing parents fighting over pickup schedules, and one very memorable incident involving a sitting U.S. senator and an unpaid auction paddle. She had handled all of it with perfect manners and absolute zero tolerance for nonsense. She walked through the front door of Summit Academy and surveyed the scene in the carpool lane. 4 police officers, 1 man in handcuffs, 17 frozen vehicles, and what appeared to be at least a dozen phone cameras. She walked directly to Officer Harlan. "Officer, what seems to be the problem here?" "Ma'am, this is a police matter. Please step." "I am the principal of this school, and this is my carpool lane. Who is this man?" "He claims he's a parent." "He is a parent." Evelyn had pulled out her phone. She scrolled, found the record, held it up. "Brielle Ellington, grade 4, father listed as Marcus Ellington, emergency contact, authorized pickup, has been on our contact sheet since last year." She looked at Harlan the way she had looked at 1,000 children who had done something inexplicable. He is exactly where he is supposed to be. Harlan's jaw worked. "We had concerns." "What concerns?" Evelyn's voice remained perfectly pleasant. This was perhaps the most terrifying version of her. "Please be specific." Harlan could not be specific, not in any way that sounded like anything other than what it was. Evelyn turned to Marcus. She looked at the handcuffs. She looked back at Harlan with an expression that certain members of the Summit Board of Trustees had privately compared to the moment before a contained explosion. "Please, remove those immediately," she said. "Ma'am, we're still—" "I am going to get this man's daughter," Evelyn said, "and when I come back, I expect those handcuffs to be gone. Or I will personally call the chief of police, the county executive, and my attorney in that order while standing right here." She paused. "I type very fast." She turned and walked back inside. Inside, she found Brielle Ellington sitting in the front office. The girl had been waiting, backpack on both shoulders, the posture of a child who is ready, who has been ready, who is determined not to be the last one out the door on the day Daddy was supposed to come. "Brielle, sweetheart," Evelyn said in the voice she reserved for moments requiring extraordinary gentleness. "Your dad is outside, but there's been a small mix-up. Can you come with me?" Brielle looked at her with those steady, dark eyes. "Is Daddy okay?" Evelyn kept her face perfectly arranged. "He's perfectly fine. Come on." Evelyn walked back through the front door with Brielle's hand in hers. The handcuffs were still on. Later, in depositions, Harlan would say he was waiting for a supervisor's clearance. The supervisor would say he had not been called. Lennox would say he thought Harlan had made the call. What is documented is that Marcus Ellington was still standing beside his Suburban with his hands cuffed behind his back when his 9-year-old daughter walked out of the school building and saw him. What Brielle did was not cry. That came later. What she did was stop walking. Evelyn felt the small hand in hers go absolutely rigid. And then Brielle said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, but somehow carried all the way across the carpool lane, "Daddy." Marcus turned his head. He saw her. And for the first time in those long minutes, something changed in his face. Not a collapse, not a break, but a crack. A hairline fracture across 31 years of professional composure. Because this was his baby girl looking at him in handcuffs in a school parking lot. And there was nothing, not training, not discipline, not rank, that could make that not hurt. "Hey, Bree," he said, steady and gentle. "It's okay. Stay with Miss Thorpe." 6 phone cameras captured this exchange. 3 of them were at angles that caught both Marcus's face and Brielle's. One of them, belonging to a parent named Sophia Caldwell, who had once worked in broadcast media and understood exactly what she was looking at, was already being uploaded to Twitter. The tweet read, "Black man handcuffed in front of his daughter at Summit Academy school pickup. 4 cops. He was just trying to get his kid. I'm shaking." At Fairfax County PD. Sophia had 4,200 followers. The tweet quickly gained 47,000 likes. It soon had 310,000 retweets and became the #1 trending topic in the United States. By evening, a reporter from Channel 7 News was live in front of Summit Academy with a 45-second clip, 3 phone videos edited together, and a caption that read, "Man handcuffed at school pickup. Identity unknown." The identity was still unknown because Marcus had said nothing to the officers about who he was. Not because he was hiding it, but because he was Marcus Ellington. And Marcus Ellington did not believe a man's dignity should be conditional on his job title. He had given them his name. That should have been enough. It was the deputy director of the FBI who made the identity public, and he did it not through a statement, but through a phone call. Victor Kane had been monitoring his phone with increasing alarm since his own assistant forwarded him the Twitter thread. Victor was 58. A 24-year bureau veteran, and he had one non-negotiable priority in his professional life, protecting the director. He called Marcus, who had been released from the handcuffs after Evelyn Thorpe produced her phone and began dialing with theatrical precision. "I'm fine," Marcus said before Victor could speak. "Mark, it's everywhere." "I know." The secretary called the attorney general. "Victor?" "Yeah?" "I'm taking my daughter to get ice cream. I'll be in the office later." He hung up. Victor Kane sat in his office on the 5th floor of the Hoover Building and stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop and sent a single email to the FBI's Public Affairs Office, the Department of Justice Communications team, and the personal phone of the Attorney General of the United States. The subject line read, "The man in the video is Director Ellington." The internet did not sleep that night. By evening, 6 different video compilations had been created, edited, and posted. The most viral, assembled by a 22-year-old content creator in Atlanta named Jamal Rivera, who had 1.4 million YouTube subscribers, ran 4 minutes and 47 seconds, and had been viewed 9 million times within hours. Jamal had done something precise and devastating. He had layered the audio of Harlan's commands over slow-motion footage of Brielle's face when she saw her father. He had not added music. He did not need to. The comment section was 340,000 comments deep by morning. Most of them were variations on the same sentiment. Some were angrier. Some were heartbroken. A small number were defensive of the officers, and these were noted, screenshot, and shared as exhibits in a parallel conversation that was already spiraling. What broke the national conversation open, what sent it from viral outrage to historical moment, was the identity reveal. Within hours, ABC News confirmed it. NBC confirmed it. Every major outlet had it. The man in the video, the man in handcuffs standing beside a government Suburban watching his daughter walk out of school, was Marcus Ellington, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the United States. A man who commanded 35,000 agents and staff across 56 field offices. A man who briefed the President of the United States weekly. A man who had, over the course of his career, arrested people, directed operations, testified before Congress, and stood in more rooms of power than most Americans could name. He had been handcuffed for picking up his daughter. The White House issued a statement. It was careful, measured, and used the word disturbing twice. The Attorney General called the director of the FBI, which everyone noted was a somewhat unprecedented direction for that call to travel, to personally express his concern. Chief Warren Maddox of the Fairfax County Police Department held a press conference with the specific expression of a man who has eaten something deeply unpleasant and is attempting to appear composed. "We take all incidents of this nature seriously," Chief Maddox said. "Officer Harlan has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal review. We want to extend our—" A reporter from the Washington Post interrupted. "Chief Maddox, is it your department's policy to ask parents for ID in the carpool lane?" "No, it is." Was Officer Harlan following policy when he asked Director Ellington for ID? "The review will—" Was he following policy when he applied handcuffs? Chief Maddox looked at the podium as if it might offer rescue. It did not. By nightfall, Harlan's social media accounts had been found, archived, and analyzed by thousands of people simultaneously. What they found was not a monster. It was something more mundane and perhaps more troubling. A young man's ordinary life, ordinary opinions, ordinary blind spots, and one tweet posted years earlier that used the phrase, "profiling gets results," in defense of a controversy that had nothing to do with Fairfax County but said everything necessary about the lens through which Officer Bryce Harlan saw the world. The tweet had 7 likes when it was posted. It soon had millions of impressions. Later that night, Harlan's mother called him and cried for 45 minutes. In the early hours, Harlan sat in his apartment in a nearby Virginia town, with the curtains closed and his phone on the floor. And he thought, for the first time, slowly, uncomfortably, in the dark, about the question the man in the suit had asked him. On what grounds? He did not have a good answer. He had not had one in the carpool lane either. He just had not known it then. Here is where the story turns. Because while the internet was processing Director Ellington and the viral moment and the White House statement and Chief Maddox's press conference, something else was happening in the background. Something that almost nobody caught until a researcher named Elena Rivera, who wrote a legal accountability newsletter called the Fourth Amendment Review, published a deep dive piece that began moving through legal and law enforcement circles like a slow-burning fire. Elena had pulled the internal communications log of the Fairfax County Police Department's traffic coordination program. It was public record. Technically, most people did not know to look for it. She had been covering municipal police department procedures for 4 years and knew exactly which FOIA requests to file and which clerks to call. What she found was this. Officer Harlan had not been randomly assigned to Summit Academy. He had requested the posting. He had put in for the Summit carpool detail 3 days after a different officer, a black officer named Sergeant Dennis Crawford, had been initially assigned to it. Harlan had filed a shift preference form, which was routine, but he had also sent an email to his shift supervisor citing familiarity with the neighborhood and community relationship goals. His supervisor, Lieutenant Garrett Foley, had approved the swap without thinking much about it. Sergeant Crawford had been curious about the reassignment at the time, but had not pushed it. He was professional that way. He had noted it, filed it away, and moved on. Elena Rivera had also pulled the carpool lane incident log for the 3 weeks Harlan had been stationed at Summit. In those 3 weeks, he had documented 4 suspicious individual checks. She cross-referenced the descriptions. 3 of the 4 were black or Hispanic. The 4th was a white man in a pickup truck who had, the notes indicated, been verbally aggressive and subsequently cleared. 3 of the 4 suspicious individuals had been parents with children at Summit Academy. The pattern was not an anomaly, it was a frequency. Then came the deeper twist, the one that nobody saw coming. While pulling Harlan's record, Elena found something that had been partially redacted in an older file. She filed an expedited FOIA request for the full document. It came back the next morning. Bryce Harlan had been involved in a prior incident several months earlier at a different location in Fairfax County. He had detained a man named Desmond Wright, a 50-year-old black contractor, for loitering outside a home in a neighborhood where Desmond had a signed contract to do renovation work. Desmond had complained. The complaint had been reviewed internally. The finding: officer exercised appropriate caution. No action taken. Desmond Wright had not had a government-plated Suburban. Desmond Wright had not been the director of the FBI. Desmond Wright's complaint was 7 paragraphs in a file that had gone nowhere. Elena Rivera published the connection the next morning. The piece was shared 200,000 times in 2 hours. Desmond Wright gave his first interview, sitting at his kitchen table in a nearby Virginia town, his signed renovation contract visible on the table in front of him, to the Washington Post. He was quiet, deliberate, and precise about every detail. "I told them who I was," Desmond said. "I showed them the contract. They said I still looked suspicious. I asked, suspicious of what exactly? They didn't answer. They just told me to move along." He paused. "Nobody put me on the news. Nobody made it a story. I just went home and tried to finish the job." He looked at the camera. "Same thing happened to that man, except he was the FBI director, and now everybody's upset." Desmond Wright had 140 Twitter followers before that morning. He had 340,000 by evening. The lawsuit was filed a week after the incident. Marcus Ellington did not file it himself. He had been careful about that, precise in his public statements, measured in his appearances, unwilling to use his position as a weapon when a private citizen in the same situation would not have had access to those same weapons. What he said in his one public statement, delivered in a 2-minute press appearance with Brielle at his side, was this: "I am the director of the FBI. I should not have been treated that way. But here is what I need every person watching this to understand. Desmond Wright is a contractor from a nearby town. He was treated the same way. So was the man before him, and the man before that, and the thousands of men whose names you will never know because they didn't have government plates and a viral video. My daughter asked me that night if I was okay. I told her I was. What I should have told her is that I'm going to make sure this never happens to her or to anyone who looks like her or like me. That's what I intend to do." He stepped away from the microphone. The lawsuit was filed by a coalition: Desmond Wright, represented by civil rights attorney Zara Okonjo of the Washington-based firm Okonjo and Chase. 2 of the 3 other parents who had been subject to Harlan's carpool lane checks, Quentin Bowman and a woman named Isabella Delgado, joined the suit. Marcus Ellington, after consultation with the Department of Justice's Ethics Office, submitted a formal declaration supporting the plaintiffs, but did not join as a named plaintiff, citing his position. His declaration was 47 pages long. It was, legal observers noted, the most precisely written eyewitness account they had ever seen from a law enforcement official testifying against another law enforcement official. Zara Okonjo read the first 3 pages in her office and then sat quietly for a moment before calling her paralegal in and saying simply, "We're going to win this." The suit named Officer Bryce Harlan, Lieutenant Garrett Foley, Chief Warren Maddox, and Fairfax County. It alleged civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, racial discrimination, false imprisonment, and a systemic pattern of discriminatory enforcement. The discovery process was where things began to unravel for the defense, with the specific terrible momentum of a building whose foundation has cracked. Harlan's text messages were subpoenaed. Among them was a text sent to Officer Kai Lennox on the morning of the incident, hours before, in which Harlan wrote, "Working the school pickup again. These Summit parents need to chill with their attitude." Lennox had responded, "LOL, anyone give you trouble?" Harlan, "Not yet. But there's always a few who think they can park wherever." Then, 20 minutes later, "Also, the type that pulls up in a nice car, but something's always a little off." The jury, when shown this exchange, was silent for a very long time. Foley's email approval of the posting swap was entered into evidence. A use of force expert named Dr. Elias Caputo, retired from the NYPD after 22 years, testified for 3 hours about departmental standards for applying handcuffs and the specific circumstances under which physical restraint was appropriate in a carpool line. His conclusion, delivered with the flat precision of a man who had seen too much to be anything but honest, was, "There is no circumstance described in Fairfax County's own policy manual that would authorize this detention. None." Chief Maddox was deposed. It lasted 6 hours. Afterward, his attorney declined to comment. The county's insurance carrier called for a settlement conference weeks into discovery. The settlement was reached several months after the incident. Fairfax County agreed to pay $35.7 million to be distributed among the 4 plaintiffs, their legal fees, and a newly established community oversight fund. Harlan was terminated. Foley was demoted. Chief Maddox took early retirement, which his department statement described as voluntary. The oversight fund was named at Desmond Wright's suggestion after no one famous. It was named after his grandmother. This is the part of the story that is hardest to tell simply. Bryce Harlan sat across from a journalist named Julian Brangan at a diner in a nearby Virginia town, months after the settlement, post-termination, post-everything. And he was not the monster the internet had decided he was. And he was not blameless. And he was not redeemed. And he was not destroyed. He was 27 years old. And he was sitting with what he had done in a way that was visibly uncomfortable and not yet complete. He had started seeing a therapist in the weeks after the incident. Her name was Dr. Lena Fitch. She had recommended a specific kind of work: implicit bias training, anti-racism education, and most importantly, a process she called accountability archaeology. Digging through the assumptions you had built so slowly and so long ago that you did not know they were there until something enormous crashed through them. "I keep thinking about what he asked me," Harlan told Brangan. His coffee was untouched. "On what grounds? And I keep not having a good answer. And every time I try to build one, it falls apart." He paused. "Because the answer is, I saw him. And I saw something that made me uncomfortable. And I told myself that was instinct, but it wasn't. It was just—" He stopped. "What?" Brangan asked. "It was just what I had always been taught to see. And I never asked who taught me or why or whether they were right." He looked out the window. They weren't right. This was not absolution. Zara Okonjo, when Brangan asked her about Harlan's interview, said, "What he's describing is the bare minimum of honest self-reflection. It's a starting point, not an ending point. My clients don't get to move on because he's going to therapy." Quentin Bowman had nightmares for months. Isabella Delgado's son, who was in the car, has anxiety attacks. Brielle Ellington is 9 years old, and she watched her father get handcuffed. Her voice was even and steady when she spoke later. So good for Bryce Harlan that he's in therapy. The work he has to do won't be finished for a very long time. Desmond Wright was not interviewed for the Brangan piece. His publicist, he had a publicist now, something that still made Desmond laugh with the specific bewilderment of a man whose life had been rearranged by accident, said he was focused on a project. He was working with a nonprofit called the Ordinary Citizens Legal Defense Fund, which he had co-founded with 2 of the other Harlan incident victims, to provide legal representation to people who filed police complaint forms that went nowhere. "The complaint I filed," Desmond had said in an earlier interview, "went into a folder. The folder went into a cabinet. The cabinet is probably still there. I want to make sure the next Desmond Wright doesn't just go home and try to finish the job." The fund had, by the time of publication, handled 31 cases in Northern Virginia. 19 of them had resulted in formal sanctions against officers. 4 had resulted in policy changes. None of them had involved the FBI director. All of them had involved someone equally deserving of justice. Marcus took her to ice cream that night at their favorite local shop called the Scoop Box, which had been her favorite since she was 5 because they did custom mix-ins, and the woman behind the counter, whose name was Patty, always gave Brielle extra sprinkles and called her Miss B. They sat at a table by the window. Brielle had chocolate with gummy bears and crushed Oreos. Marcus had plain vanilla because he always had plain vanilla, and Brielle always made fun of him for it. "Daddy," she said, "why did the police do that?" Marcus put his spoon down. He looked at his daughter. 9 years old, serious eyes, Oreo crumbs on her chin. And he made the kind of decision that parents make in the moments that shape everything. He decided to tell the truth. Not all of it. She was 9, but enough. Because sometimes, he said, people make assumptions about someone based on how they look, and sometimes those assumptions lead them to do things they shouldn't do, because you're black. He paused. Yes. Brielle considered this. She stirred her ice cream. "But you're the FBI director." "I know. So they should have known." Brie. He leaned forward slightly. "They should have known because I told them my name. That's why. Not because of my job. Just because I told them who I was and I wasn't doing anything wrong. That should have been enough." She looked at him. "But it wasn't." "No," he said. "It wasn't. And that's what we're going to keep working on." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Are you sad?" He thought about the honest answer. "A little," he said, "but mostly I'm okay." He reached across and wiped the crumbs off her chin. "Because I got to pick you up." She smiled. Her mother's smile, sudden and room-filling, and for a moment it made everything. The handcuffs, the cameras, the calls, the settlement, the whole enormous machinery of consequence feel very far away. They finished their ice cream. He drove her home. Serena Ellington was waiting at the door. She had been watching the news for hours and had been texting Marcus in the careful, controlled way of a woman who was using the effort of composure as armor. When he walked in with Brielle, Serena looked at him for a moment, just looked. The way people look when they have been afraid, and the fear is only now releasing. And then she pulled him into a hug. That was the most honest thing that happened that entire day. Brielle went upstairs to do homework. Marcus and Serena stood in the front hallway for a long time. "You okay?" she said. "Better now," he said. $35.7 million. Read it fast, and it feels like justice. Let it sit. Really sit with it. Turn it over. Hold it up to the light and it becomes something more complicated. Something that resists easy interpretation. Something that is simultaneously more than Desmond Wright ever expected and less than what Brielle Ellington deserves. Numbers have a way of doing that. They close arguments while leaving wounds wide open. Let's go through the numbers carefully because they tell the story that the headlines did not have room for. Quentin Bowman received $1.2 million. He is a 41-year-old project manager who had been picking up his daughter from Summit for 2 years without incident until Harlan's third week on the posting, when he was asked to step out of his Lexus and explain why he was in the carpool lane. He'd explained calmly in detail. He had shown his ID, shown his daughter's school record on his phone, and waited while Harlan radioed something to someone who apparently confirmed that yes, this man's child did indeed attend this school. Quentin was never handcuffed, but he sat in his car for 19 minutes while other parents moved around him, and his daughter stood at the curb watching. And something happened in those 19 minutes that a $1.2 million settlement cannot fully address. He still flinches when he sees a police cruiser in a parking lot. Not a dramatic flinch, not something you would notice if you were not looking for it. A small, involuntary tightening across his shoulders, a half-second recalibration, a tax that his body pays every single time. He described it in a podcast interview with host Dana Whitfield, who runs a long-form civil rights program called Reckoning Room. "It's not fear exactly," Quentin said. "It's just awareness, heightened permanent awareness. And I hate that they gave me that because I didn't ask for it and I can't give it back." He used most of the settlement to pay off his mortgage and set up college funds for his 3 children. He said when asked if the money helped, that it helped with the mortgage. It has not touched the shoulders. Isabella Delgado received $1.8 million. She had been in the carpool lane on a Wednesday afternoon in early October, days before the Ellington incident, when Harlan had approached her window and asked with the particular tone of someone who has already decided something whether she was in the right place. Her son Marco was 7 years old and sitting in the booster seat directly behind her. He heard everything. He watched everything. He asked afterward why the police were mean to Mommy. Isabella did not know how to answer that and still does not, and she has had professional help trying to figure it out. Marco is in second grade now. His therapist describes him as making progress, which is one of those clinical phrases that contains enormous amounts of pain inside very few words. He is afraid of uniformed authority figures. He sometimes cries when he sees a police car on television. He is 7 years old and he is working on it, and it cost $1.8 million to establish legally that he should not have had to start working on it at all. Desmond Wright received $4.2 million, which reflected both the summit encounter and the earlier incident that Elena Rivera had surfaced, the renovation job, the signed contract on the table, the 22 minutes of explaining himself to an officer who had already made up his mind. Desmond donated $1 million to the Ordinary Citizens Legal Defense Fund immediately upon receipt, before the check had even fully cleared. He framed the donation confirmation and hung it above the fireplace. His wife, Patricia, said it was the most Desmond thing he had ever done. He said she was not wrong, and he was not sorry, and he would do it again tomorrow. The remaining $28.5 million went to legal fees, court costs, administrative expenses, and the Community Oversight Fund, the one named after Desmond's grandmother, Eunice May Wright, who had grown up in rural Georgia and who Desmond said would have had precisely zero patience for any of this and would have been in that carpool lane with a clipboard before anyone thought to call a lawyer. Now, here is what the $35.7 million did not do. It did not undo the minutes of a 9-year-old girl watching her father in handcuffs. It did not retrieve Desmond Wright's original complaint from the county folder where it had been filed, reviewed, closed, and forgotten. That document still exists, still technically marked "No action warranted," a quiet monument to how these things usually end. It did not give Isabella Delgado's son back his uncomplicated relationship with police officers, which he had on an ordinary afternoon and did not have by that same evening. It did not restore the version of Quentin Bowman who used to merge easily into traffic behind a squad car without thinking twice. What the money did, what it does in cases like this when the system works as it rarely works, is create a record, an inescapable, permanent, legally certified, publicly accessible record that states with the full weight of institutional authority. This happened. It was wrong. These people were harmed. And here are the consequences. The record cannot be unfiled. It cannot be closed with a 2-sentence finding. It exists. It goes in a different kind of folder, the kind that lawyers cite, the kind that journalists reference, the kind that future plaintiffs hand to future attorneys when they sit across a desk and ask, "Has this happened before?" It has happened before. The record now says so with dollar amounts attached. Records matter. They are not sufficient. They are not healing. They are not restoration. But they are permanent in a way that a complaint in a cabinet is not. And permanence has its own kind of power. Elena Rivera's newsletter, The Fourth Amendment Review, had 4,200 subscribers the morning she published her deep dive investigation into Harlan's pattern of stops. It had 290,000 by spring. She has hired 2 additional researchers and is currently tracking similar carpool lane and public space detention patterns in 11 other jurisdictions across Virginia, Maryland, and Georgia. She is building a database. She is cross-referencing complaint logs, FOIA requests, and settlement records. She has not slept a full 8 hours since the incident, and she considers this, on balance, a fair trade. Though she did recently buy a better coffee maker, which her husband Greg described as the most hopeful sign he had seen in months. The database is not finished. It will not be finished for a very long time. That is precisely the point. Months after the settlement, Principal Evelyn Thorpe received a letter. It was handwritten on plain white paper in careful block letters. It was from a woman in a nearby Virginia town whose name was Marlene Croft. Marlene's son, Eli, had been detained in a grocery store parking lot earlier that year for suspicious loitering. He had been waiting for his mother, who was inside buying bread. Eli was 16. He had been detained for 22 minutes. No charges, no incident report, no viral video. Marlene had filed a complaint. It had gone to a folder. After the Summit story broke, Marlene had found Elena Rivera's newsletter. Then she had found Zara Oconjo's firm. Then she had filed a FOIA request, as Elena had described in a piece about how ordinary people could track public records. The FOIA request had surfaced 3 similar incidents involving the same officer. Marlene's case was now open. She had written to Evelyn Thorpe because Evelyn had been quoted in coverage of the incident, saying she planned to implement a new staff training protocol around community interactions with law enforcement on school grounds. Marlene wanted to know if Summit Academy would consider hosting a public session open to all parents in Fairfax County, not just Summit parents, about knowing your rights in police encounters. Evelyn wrote back within 24 hours. She said yes. The session was held soon after. It was moderated by Zara Oconjo. 300 people attended. Desmond Wright sat in the second row. Quentin Bowman sat next to him. A 16-year-old boy named Eli Croft sat in the front row with his mother Marlene and held a notepad on which he took meticulous notes for the entire 2.5 hours. Marcus Ellington was not there. He was in Washington. His office confirmed he was in a meeting with senior leadership about a new departmental policy regarding interactions with minority communities during federal operations. Brielle was at home doing 4th grade homework. She had written a story that week for class about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Her teacher, a woman named Miss Sophia Park, had read it twice before giving it back. The story said, "When I grow up, I want to be someone who makes things fair. Not just for people with government cars, for everybody." Miss Park had written at the top in red pen, "Excellent work, Brielle. This is exactly the right idea." Brielle got an A. She showed it to her father that evening. He read it standing in the kitchen, still in his suit from work, and he was quiet for a moment, in the way that he was quiet sometimes. The particular stillness that meant something had landed. Then he folded the paper along its original crease very carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, the same pocket where every morning he kept a photograph of Brielle at age 4, sitting on his shoulders at the National Mall, laughing at something just outside the frame. Some things you carry close, some things you carry because they remind you why the work matters. Marcus Ellington drove to the Hoover Building the next morning. He took the elevator to the 5th floor. He walked past the photographs of every FBI director who had come before him. He stopped, as he sometimes did, at the earliest ones. The black and white faces, the formal poses, the long, unbroken chain of men who had held this office and who all, in their time, had believed they were on the right side of something. He thought about what it meant to actually be on the right side. Then he went to work. This story is real in every way that matters. The names are changed. The events are composite. But the dynamic, a black man doing something ordinary and being treated like a suspect, a complaint filed and forgotten, a reckoning that only arrives when someone powerful enough is in the frame. This is not fiction. This happens in grocery stores, parking lots, parks, and school carpool lanes every single day. Desmond Wright does not go viral. Eli Croft does not trend. The complaint goes into the folder. The folder goes into the cabinet. What you do right now matters. If this story made you feel something, anger, recognition, resolve, turn that feeling into action. Hit like so this reaches the person who needs to hear it. Share it, because Marlene Croft figured out how to fight back by reading one newsletter, and the next Marlene Croft is in your network right now. Subscribe, because we are going to keep telling these stories, the ones that go viral and the ones that do not, until the folder and the cabinet are empty, and every Eli and Desmond and Quentin gets the same answer that Zara Okonjo promised her clients. We're going to win this. The ripple starts here. Pass it on.